Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Enjoy it. Let's do it. Therapists of Reddit. What was your I know I'm not supposed to judge you, but holy shit moment? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I was counseling a 13-year-old girl for anxiety, and she reported SA from her stepdad. I called her mom and told her mother I needed to call CPS. Turns out that CPS was already aware of the abuse and was first reported around the patient's age 7. Mom was aware of the abuse and stayed with her husband anyway. It was a complicated situation, and it wasn't. How could she not do more to protect her daughter? I'm sorry, lady. I'm judging. My professor once shared what a patient said that made her quit her job. I didn't arm my daughter. She liked it. The daughter was 6. She couldn't take it anymore. She worked in a rehabilitation center for people who have sentences for serious crimes and were forced to get mental help. Really difficult job, and this pushed her over the edge. I work at a residential group home. We had a kid who had admitted about 4 months prior, when in a family session, they mentioned they had parasites. I'm like, what? Mom goes, oh yeah, our whole family has them. We don't believe in getting rid of them since they're part of our biological ecosystem. And I'm just dumbstruck. We spent 3 weeks afterwards convincing this family it was an infectious disease. Concerns as other residents have fecal eating behaviors and various other unsanitary issues that could cause a unit spread. 3 weeks of education, planning, and worst of all, convincing this kid and mother that their IQ wouldn't drop because they had agreed to irradiate the parasites. Lots of CBT work, but Jesus, it took way longer than any of my team expected.
Well, that is absolutely disgusting and disturbing. Luckily, you got them, I guess, to get rid of those things because that's horrible. Ugh.
Once had a patient whose wife shook their baby to death. He wanted help reconnecting with his wife. At the time, I was a young father of a newborn myself, and he triggered a lot of fear in me for my own child, a deep loathing of his spouse, and pity, the how pathetic kind for the patient. I tried for 3 sessions, met his spouse, and everything before handing the case over to my supervisor, who knew about my initial reactions and tried to help me through it. Unfortunately, it ended up being more about my feelings than his, and I was new to the profession at the time. These things are expected to crop up from time to time, but I was still taken aback by my own reactions. I do acute pediatric inpatient behavioral therapy. Has never happened with the child, and never will. Parents, on the other hand, can be real pieces of shit, and the way they treat or abuse their children, then throw them off on us and scream, fix them. I'm a big burly guy, and I've cried many nights over this. I was once in my psychiatrist's office, a bi-monthly 15-minute med check-in. She asked me what was going on, more as conversation. I told her that me, in the last 6 weeks, my 3 elders, aunt and 2 uncles, I was guardian conservator for her died, one right after the other. My wife had a heart attack, my daughter attempted suicide, and my mom broke her hip and had laid on her floor for a week before being found. She drank and ate from the dog's bowl. I got the call within 10 minutes of setting up the last funeral. She stopped the meeting, got on the phone with the therapist in the office next to her, and had her postpone her next meeting to speak with me. I was so effed up I had no idea. I think she saved my life. It's not often I get to talk about my profession, but here goes. I was working at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center and had a client come in who was a self-proclaimed drug lord. As we worked together, he told me about his history. Included in this history was how he got to where he was currently at. During the conversation, this man admitted to selling his sister into slavery, forcibly injecting her with several sedatives and narcotics, and having several people teach her a lesson. What this meant, he never shared. He told this story with a blank face, smiling only when he recalled the good times, which he referred to as times when he had enough heroin to get through the day. I'm not sure where he is now, but this man inspired me to work with victims of trafficking because not only do they deal with the stigma of selling their bodies, they often manage drug addictions. People would honestly be floored if they realized how many people were addicted to chemicals that they were forcibly given. I feel like a lot of the comments saying that they never judge their clients might be working in voluntary services, or they've been very fortunate in their client base. Judgment isn't an inherently bad thing. It's how we know that murdering people is wrong. So, when a convicted pedo client told me nothing gets me going like a pair of little girls worn, you better believe I judged the F out of him. I continued to work with him, and I treated him with compassion and respect because he's a human being worthy of both. I did my job because I'm a professional, but I can't honestly say that I didn't judge him. I judged that he should never be around children. I judged that he is not yet ready for change. I judged that his access to his own daughter should be closely supervised. That's a lot of judgments. Understanding your own inherent biases and how they influence your work is a very important part of training and practice. Here's my most recent one. As the pandemic worsened here in the US and more lockdowns are on their way, one of my most extroverted clients and I brainstormed ways to meet her social needs while remaining safe. The following week, she canceled her session and told me that she's positive for COVID after attending an orgy, which definitely wasn't one of our ideas. I let out the deepest, most defeated sigh after I hung up the phone.
Well, little judgy McJudger pants, whomst among us has not contracted that from that type of situation?
Lots of people discussing pedophilia as an example of the toughest stuff to not judge despite our training. I haven't yet treated a pedophile, thankfully, at least not an identified one. I did run a men's anger management group, though, and some of those men had done some terrible things to women. Most of them I found ways to like and admire for their positive aspects, but there were 2 guys in that group I just could never find unconditional positive regard for. One guy basically never spoke in group. He would give one-word answers and occasionally just discuss how unfair the system was to him. I worked really hard to open him up and find things to connect over, but he never opened up to me or the group. He left the group after he strangled his girlfriend and went to jail. She survived, thankfully. The other left the group early routinely, showed up late, participated minimally, and similarly never wanted to open up honestly. He left early one group after we had discussed him staying to the end and threatened me when I told him he wasn't going to get credit for attendance, something the court required. Oddly, I eventually moved into the apartment below him, completely without knowledge, and listened to him scream at his girlfriend and break shit while I called the cops. I judged these men. They're shitty. Maybe they're redeemable, but redemption requires self-exploration, and they both refused to do so. It's worth noting how differently I felt about them than so many others in the group. Men I found ways to help and admire and respect, even in spite of their awful behavior in the past. I joined in a review of a secluded patient, and he threw a cup of wee and poo in my face when we opened the door. I tried to be objective about his experience, but I just thought, what a cunt. I work in inpatient services, so it can be hard to challenge myself at times. Individuals with diagnosis of personality disorders, for example, can do things that in isolation make you think they're just being bratty or manipulative. But to think of the experiences that shape them to react like that in a given situation can help to clear my judgment and find compassion. Harder when someone bites me or hits me with one of our fabulously detachable anti-ligature curtain poles, though. Therapist here. I don't think I've ever judged clients. My job is to understand them and their experiences and help them make the improvements they are ready to make. But I have very directly made my thoughts clear about choices, especially choices parents make for and about their kids. This probably comes off as judgment depending on the client's insecurity about the topic. One example was telling the parents of a child I was working with a severe mood disorder that had made both suicidal and homicidal threats and attempts that it did not seem like a good idea to buy the young kid a gun, especially the week after the mother spent the session sharing her fears that the child would murder her. Clinical psychologist working primarily in forensics here. This means my clients are usually involved in legal proceedings, family court, juvenile court, criminal court, etc. My job is usually to evaluate or provide treatment. I'm not there to judge, that's the judge's job. But of course, I have my thoughts. I am usually impressed by the justifications people make for shitty behavior. The one that irks me the most is when parents manipulate their child against the other parent. I've had to do therapy for a 5-year-old who said she doesn't want to see a parent because they haven't paid child support. Excuse me? What 5-year-old knows, understands, or needs to be worried about child support? Opposite side, if that's accepted too. I was assigned to see the lead psychologist of the local hospital as I was severely depressed and had become suicidal. She literally rolled her eyes at me, told me to grow up, and said she could be having appointments with people who were actually about to kill themselves, not me, who was already working with the team. This sent me absolutely spinning, bottling everything up, thinking I didn't deserve help, and ended up in hospital 2 years later after an attempt. When they looked at my records, the hospital suddenly became very interested in any psychological experts I'd previously spoken to, informed them of the above incident. They asked if I knew the name, and I said I didn't, but they had a strong accent. They immediately looked like they were about to burst out crying, apologized excessively, then informed me they had been fired a year ago. No idea how many people were affected by that therapist. OP, you mentioned you're getting ready to start therapy. I know we're different, but therapy was one of the best decisions I ever made for myself. It's good to have a neutral third party weigh in on what troubles you. And remember, you don't have to stay with the therapist if you don't want. Therapy, like any psychological treatment, is often more about trial and error to find what works for the individual than anything. Also, you'll get out of it what you put in, so be upfront, frank, and honest with your therapist. That will help them work with you on determining the best therapy course for you. I wish you the best of luck. When I was underage, I got caught with a drink on Bourbon Street and got a minor in possession. I was telling my therapist about it and said that the police caught me with a hand grenade in New Orleans. He didn't realize that a hand grenade was a type of drink, and it was funny to watch him try and process that his patient might have just casually told him that he had been caught with a fragmentation grenade. He took a big long pause and said, "Where did you even find a grenade?" I realized the misunderstanding quickly and corrected him, but for a moment he definitely was thinking, holy shit, how do I deal with this?
I love how otherwise innocuous things can have horrible names, and to people that don't know may sound like a threat to survival. So calling a cocktail a hand grenade is funny in and of itself to someone who's not familiar, but good story, thank you.
Well, I quit my last therapist because I made him cry uncontrollably. He tried not to, but he just couldn't hold it back. I felt guilty and won't see him anymore. I think he may have lost a child before. I described watching my aunt grieve over her son's body. I felt so much pain losing him, but was explaining how watching my aunt was dramatically worse. The details about her is what made him lose it. I could tell he was reliving something inside his own head. Should be a therapist. When I was a teenager, I lived in a very emotionally and mentally abusive household. I know people don't take that stuff seriously, but it was so bad that I was later diagnosed with PTSD from a psychiatrist. Anywho, my abusive parents and I got in a verbal fight in the car. My stepdad stopped the car and told me, "Get out, we're leaving you on the highway." I wasn't scared because I knew I could just call the police, say I was an abandoned child, and they'd get in loads of trouble. So I said, "Sounds good," and got out. My mom then came out and started attacking me. I refused to get back in the car after the attack, so my stepdad got out, dragged me by the hair, called me a bipolar bitch, and threw me in. They made me see a therapist. They told her that I jumped out of a moving car and that I attacked my mom when she was trying to help. This therapist didn't believe anything I said and tried getting me to take bipolar meds. I knew I wasn't bipolar. I was being abused, and I knew that the anger and sadness I felt were normal for my situation. She glared at me and said, "You're not nearly as smart as you think you are." I refused to say a word in any of our therapy sessions after that. I would just go in, sit down, and she'd make snarky, sarcastic remarks for a few minutes, then dismiss me. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to help my parents. I moved out when I was 18, went to college all on my own, with no financial help from my family, got a job and left the country to be as far from them as possible. I'm on antidepressants for my PTSD, and luckily the therapists I've had since my teenage years have been nothing like that horrible woman, but it still upsets me deeply thinking about it.